Pataki. Oni ni ojo abameta. Erele moka odun ekbawa ogun. Mokenle logoji ojo ekba otutu. It's the second decan of Aquarius season and the moon was waxing in Taurus. It was an exciting day indeed. Eshu opened the way for something grand. I was given the honor of performing a poetic piece to open for Professor James Small at the Shrine of the Black Madonna, just before he gave a powerful spoken presentation on our history, spirituality, our culture, and our sense of God. Pataki, oni ni ojobo, belu merinla odun egbawa mokin le logo. Adota ojo egba oye. It is a day of divinity, 1111 all the way across the timestamp and the original production timing screen. Scorpio season for the Scorpio King in my Scorpio vortex, and the divine purpose and meeting Professor James Small finds one of many manifestations through this conversation/interview titled Astrology and Us. Enjoy. Good rising, good afternoon, or good evening from wherever you are in the world. As many of you know, I am Ayansa JT Muse, and today we are going to be talking about indigenous astrology. And it is my honor to present tonight's guest, or this afternoon's guest, or this morning's guest, depending on wherever you're tuning in the world. He is a motivational speaker, dynamic speaker. He's a Pan-African activist, a scholar, and a priest of Oya like myself, among many other things, to name a few. It is my honor and privilege to present to you the one, the only, Professor James Small. How are you this afternoon?
I am beautiful, my Iya. How are you?
I am doing well. I first want to say thank you for being a part of this interview and allowing me to, interview you on your thoughts of astrology and astronomy. So before we begin, I'd like to hear, or if you will, share with the audience more about your background and how you came to be in the place you are today.
I always find that part a bit difficult. I'm someone who's been evolving in time for 75 years and about 7 months on the planet Earth. I was born in an African village down in South Carolina, a little place called Georgetown. I left there, not permanently, but I was about 18. Served in the U.S. Navy, went to college before that at Savannah State, where I played football. Then left college because of civil rights incidences in Savannah. When I finished the military, I met, somewhere in between there, before I went to college, I met Malcolm X, the most extraordinary man, 1963. Had a lot of impact on my spirit. While I was in the military, he was assassinated. So when I came home, I joined his organization and became the leader of his mosque, the imam of the Muslim Mosque, Inc. Served as his sister's bodyguard for about 18 years in the OAAU, the Organization of Afro-American Unity. I was the liaison between the Black Panther Party and the OAAU, and a voice for the underground called the Black Liberation Army in the 60s. I went to college at City University and the College of Siskiyou in Northern California. Taught at City University for about 20 years, was an administrator there for 15 years. Traveled back and forth to Africa, where I have a company, Cultural Heritage African Tours. And me and my partners are the owners for about 17 years of a hotel in Ghana called the Sana Lodge Enterprise Limited. I have 8 children, 2 of them adopted, 23 grandkids. married for 51 years, been in the movement all of my life. My most active sit-in, I was about 14. And that has been my entire life, learning African history, African culture, African spiritual systems, teaching it to our people, understanding Pan-Africanism, African nationalism, and trying to teach that to my people. And that has basically been my life.
Ashe. You know, it's interesting you say that because I went to an event at the Shape Center in 2011, shortly after the Carl Hampton commemoration, and there was a documentary there. And on this documentary, I remember one of the women saying that the movements would have how do I put it? She said that the Black Panther Party would have been stronger had they had more of a spiritual grounding. And
Uh,
I want to ask you, in the paths of all of your activism, how did you come to become a priest in Ifa Orisha tradition? Was there a battle there or some kind of divide, or was it a natural flow and a part of your life?
oh no. The Black Panther Party is well known, but it's been poorly represented. I thought the people in the party were very spiritual people. You
Okay.
can't do that, put your life on the line in that way without being spiritual. Many of the leadership I know on the East Coast was a part of Malcolm X's organization as young people before Malcolm was assassinated. Um, Both a part of his Muslim mosque and his OAAU. Matter of fact, some of them who evolved from the Black Panther Party into the Black Liberation Army, who were the students of Malcolm X, are still in prison, and we're fighting for them today. When we are shown the Black Panther Party, we're shown guys and girls or brothers and sisters in black uniforms with their berets and their natural hairdo marching. But that's the least of what they did. What they did was fed children in a nation where the children were going to school hungry every day in the working class and poor community. So we take for granted that schools now have breakfast programs, but they copied that from the work of the Black Panther Party, who opened up the first breakfast program. They set up free clinics in the black communities all over the country. So the poor who didn't have insurance and didn't have access to medicine would have access to voluntary nurses and doctors, blacks and whites and Asians. They set up food banks. Now we see all the food pantries and things, but most people don't know. You got to give that to the Black Panther Party. So those were three of its major things that took up most of the work of the party. But they tend to focus on a few people carrying guns on one or two occasions, or a few shootouts, or people parading around in black uniform. But the day-to-day work within the community, teaching people, registering people to vote, running people for political office, people don't know that part of the party. And so when you know what the party was really doing, feeding those children every morning across the country, running those health clinics every day across the country, the food banks for the homeless every day across the country, you'll see a different Black Panther Party,
Ashe.
you know. And then you'll understand that there was a lot of spiritual energy there, recognizing Africa as our mother, promoting international revolutionary solidarity with Cuba, with Africa, and parts of Asia that was being oppressed. So when you look at that, made up the majority of what the party did. So when you look at that, you'll see a different Black Panther Party. You'll see the real Black Panther Party. And
Absolutely.
that's why they came at them so forcibly,
Okay.
because of those services, you know.
I think that reflects like a huge difference between spirituality in terms of religious dogma and spirituality in terms of putting your spiritual convictions into action. So, to connect my next question to the topic at hand, which is indigenous astrology, One thing I noticed as an astrologer, I do check out people's cosmic blueprints, and Huey P. Newton was an Aquarius. And interestingly, humanity, it's being said to be headed into the age of Aquarius, out of the age of Pisces. And this is where we get these common sayings that people are, quote unquote, ahead of their time. You see what I'm saying? So, tying that into indigenous astrology, in your honest opinion, why do you think that astrology has been dulled down, watered down, and deemed sinful amongst indigenous people?
Well, first, I don't believe in anyone being ahead of their time.
Ashe.
Okay, because had they not come, we would not come. And so they brought the light. What we see in watching the Aquarians, if you check them deeply, you'll find that Aquarius may have only been one of the energy force.
Yes.
And that part, that is Aquarius, is yet to manifest itself in full bloom when people refer back to his work. And so you'll see the Pisces part of him as well. That opens the door for the Aquarian part of him. The Pisces part of him may have been the physical time he was here. But the Aquarian part is yet to come when we refer back to the message that the Pisces part brought forward. And so we're trying to grasp an old science. Among indigenous people, this science is still alive.
Yes.
It's not alive as it needs to be among the contemporary African Asian population. But if you go to Africa, to the village, this is what they live by. You know, you go to any part of indigenous cultures in the world, in one form or another, because there's multiple ways of knowing astrology. You find that's what their daily lives are about. That's how they govern themselves. But when you come to the new urban metropolis and quote-unquote Western style education consciousness, then it has been marginalized to something not much more than a game in a newspaper, that people play with. Oh, I want to read my horoscope. What does my horoscope says? Oh, my moon is in Jupiter, and it has absolutely no meaning to them. But in the rural areas of the world, especially of the African world, these things still have meaning to the daily lives of the people that live there. But they're not the ones that's running the world. The world is being run by the contemporary population in the urban metropolis of the world that's running the government and the economies of the world. And they marginalize it because that is a science.
Yes.
That liberate and enable the masses. And so they don't want the masses to have a body of knowledge about cosmology and ecology that would allow them to prevent exploitation and genocide on themselves. And so what we see probably in 9th century Europe, who got astrology basically from the Greeks, who got it from the Africans of Mesopotamia and Africa, and it was brought back to Europe by the Arabs, who took the body of knowledge that the Greeks left, and Egypt, especially when they conquered Egypt, and began to translate it first in Spain and other parts of Europe. And we began to see the growth of the knowledge of astrology. But around the period that the Europeans call, which is around 1400 or so, the European Renaissance, is when they began to get a understanding of that aspect of the ancient science that they call astronomy.
Yes.
Then they began to marginalize astrology, primarily because the church, the Catholic Church, having been the dominant instrument for socializing people at that time, felt that astrology challenged their authority for interpreting divinity.
Absolutely.
And
Because
so, right. And
because astrology more so aligns with the divinities and the gods being the real authority,
right,
and they felt challenged by that authority. So, really, the dulling down of astrology is pretty much the war of earth against heaven.
well, I'll use those concepts. I don't like them because they're so Eurocentric in terms of its cubism, you know. Uh, because you can't really delineate between heaven and earth because heaven is being conscious of your divinity. And so wherever you are on earth, when you're conscious of you being an aspect of the divinity itself, then you're in heaven. Most people are not conscious of that. They don't realize that the food they ate this morning um, came from the earth, and the minerals in the earth came from all of the living things that once died. And those living things was brought back to life in their resurrection by the cosmos, the light of the sun, and the energies from the other heavenly bodies. And when we eat them, we then infuse ourselves with energy that allow us to function as a glob of matter organism that we call a human being. And so there's this cycle of reality that has to do with the relationship between cosmology and ecology that is the constant core of astrology, explaining that relationship. What impact does the cosmology have on the human population? What the impact does cosmology and what we call the heavenly bodies have on the earth that the human used to survive? And so the relationship between those three parts is explained through astrology to show its effects and its relationship. What effects does the moon have on a human body? What effect does the planet Venus have on a human body? What effect does Mercury have on a human body? And what time of year does these effects take place? How we even came up with the concept of measuring time as an astrological phenomenon. How we came up with the concept of creating a calendar with a day with 24 hours and divided into the 24 hours. All that comes from astrology. How we created the month of the year to come up with the 12 months. All of that comes from astrology, with a marriage to astronomy by studying the movements of the heavenly bodies, or the movements of the elements, the different planets, the different moons, and then the movements of the constellations, and then the movements of the different stars that forms the constellations within any constellation. To watch the whole universe replicate itself, it takes 25,000 years of observation. And to validate that what you realize in the 25,000 years, you have to watch it for a second 25,000 years to say, wow, it replicated those movements. It replicated those positions. It replicated those turns. And it does it every 25,000 years. So what we're talking about when we're talking about astrology and the human being's relationship to trying to explain the science of the universe itself, it took them at least 50,000 years to say, we got something here.
Absolutely.
Everything became what it was 50,000 years ago, or 25,000 years ago. But we had to watch it twice to make sure that does it do it every 25,000 years? And somebody said, well, we better try another 25,000 to make sure we got this right. So now we're talking about 75,000 years at least for them to say, these are the rules that governs our daily behavior. It tells us when the flood is coming. It tells us when the rain is coming.
Oh, yes, yes,
It tells
yes.
us when the migration of the animals would take place. It tells us when the birds will come here and when the birds will go away. It tells us when certain fish will be in the river. And it tells us when there's a time not to fish because those fish is not in that river. We know from watching the constellations and measuring them in what we call astronomy. And then we explain and interpret it, giving its effect on us in what we call astrology.
Absolutely.
So, a simple enough answer.
Oh, it was a wonderful answer. And I know you noticed I got a little stirred up towards the end of your statement because I do keep up with the planets. And 2020, everything that happened in 2020 with the pandemic and with a lot of the chaos that 2020 had seen, both 2018 and 2019 both saw 7 planets in retrograde at the same time.
Mm. So explain retrograde to me. I don't understand that one fully.
Absolutely. When a planet goes into retrograde, each and every planet has its own axis. They all have a certain number of days it takes them to make a complete orbit around the sun. Now, retrograde, it's said that the planet is moving backwards, when actually the planet is moving so fast that it appears to be moving backwards. So when a planet goes into retrograde, it brings the opposite sides of their energy into play. For example, a lot of people go so nuts when Mercury is in retrograde. Mercury is the planet of communication. So when Mercury is in retrograde, a lot of communication gets mixed up. There are issues with communication devices. It's not a good time to start anything new because when communication is moving backwards, that's a message from the heavens that it's actually a time to sit still and reflect. Mercury retrograde energy, all retrograde energies can be worked with very profoundly if you understand the energy of the planet. For example, Uranus is currently in retrograde. Okay, now Uranus is the higher octave of Mercury, which is the planet that represents intuition. So
And,
while, go ahead.
and that intuition we would call probably, if we were using Greek system, we would talk about Venus. If we were using a Yoruba system, we would talk about Oshun.
Yes, well, with Venus, yes.
Right.
And I'm glad you brought up Venus because there are a lot of people don't know this, but a lot of top plastic surgeons do not do any operations while Venus is in retrograde because Venus is the planet of beauty. So if you're getting a cosmetic surgery, you probably wouldn't want to do that when the planet of beauty is moving backwards or it appears to be moving backwards.
Right.
So, retrograde, any planetary retrograde, is a time to reflect on the opposite or the contrasting energies of that planet.
Because one thing that you notice when you're studying or trying to learn, because I'm not very learned in astrology, but I know basics, and I know when we think of um, ourselves and we think of the stars, it's like a woman's cycle, that she goes through with her menstruation. You
Yes.
can predict and measure that, and the ancestors obviously did by the movements of the stars, by the movements of the planets. And so we're bound to the rest of the universe, and the body of knowledge that binds us is the body of knowledge we call astrology, which have been marginalized, as we said earlier, because there's another group who have another body of knowledge that they want to use to dominate. And so you marginalize the body of knowledge that would give freedom, and you implement the body of knowledge which they call today science. But if you study the essence of the meaning of science, astrology is a higher science than even astronomy, even though astrology is used to interpret the data that we get from what we call astronomy. Astrology, if you look at the very notions of what they call science, investigation, replication, then astrology is at the top of that list, you see.
Yes. So, how has astrology played a role in your life personally?
Like I said, I'm not that well versed, but I'm sure it has to because, like when we mentioned spirituality earlier, you were talking about spirituality. Well, spirituality And my understanding of my reality is my reality. What the world is calling spirituality is really when you are conscious of and fully participating in your day by day, hour by hour, minute by minute reality. And so, that being the case, I know that what I call God or Allah or the Damari or whatever name we use, because the thing doesn't care what name we use, we make up these names, but we are referring to the same force and cause. And so, when anything happens to my life, I'm aware that I'm a part of that causation. And it has rules, it has cycles, it has a rhythm. And the cycles and the rules and the rhythms of my body must be in sync with the cycles and the rules and the rhythm of nature and the universe. And what astrology does, if you know even a modicum about it, it allows you to recognize and be conscious when you are out of rhythm, when you are out of balance, when you're out of alignment, and what to do to get back into rhythm, back into balance, back into alignment. Because everything in the universe is cause and effect. It's polar opposites.
Absolutely.
But that doesn't make them negative, as the West would do, call one devil and one God. No, the ancestors didn't do that. You know, in ancient Kemet, they said Seth and Haru, but Seth was not considered evil in Egypt. It was just the polar opposite of Haru. Haru was no more divine than Seth was. It was just the polar opposite of Seth. They needed that antagonistic relationship in order to keep vibration vibrating, which is
Yes.
the essence of life itself.
So I heard you make a statement about really does that whatever name we call it, and that leads to my next question. What are your thoughts on the different symbolisms used in astrology or spirituality, period? For example, Aries being represented by the ram, Leo, the lion, Gemini, the twins, Scorpio, the scorpion. Where do you think all of that comes from?
Well, a lot of those symbols come from really the Greeks, because in Mesopotamia, when they started studying, when they finally, and I go back to the Greeks, because they brought to the Western European world, who's now the dominant institution, the information they found in Mesopotamia. And let me be clear to people, when I say Mesopotamia, I'm talking about Northeast Africa. The Tigris and Euphrates is in Africa. They could call it the Middle East, but they don't have a Middle West, Middle South, or Middle North. So how do we get a Middle East? So what they're calling the Middle East is that part of Northeast Africa that was so profound in the beginning of civilization's understanding of the sacred sciences of the universe that the Europeans wanted to take it for themselves. So then they said, oh, we were the people who were there doing this. But to do that, we have to geologically detach it from Africa. And then they even made a move to detach it physically with the Suez Canal. But that doesn't change the geology, nor the historiography of the people of Sumer, the people of Akkad, and the people of Mesopotamia. Those are the same African people who are having this conversation right now with each other over the telephone. And so once we get clear on that understanding, then we're able to see what changes. Because if we look at the Chinese calendar, they may have some different symbols in their astrological calendar. If you look at the Indian calendar, they may have some different symbols.
Absolutely.
It depends on what's in that culture that represents the quality and the attributes that that particular sign is referencing. So in one culture, it may be the lamb. And in another culture, it may be another animal or bird or fish that represent that same set of quality that the lamb represents. So once we understand that, we don't see them as different when we look at the I Ching and some of the other systems of the West, of the East. They're not saying something different. They're just using what it is in their environment to explain the same thing.
Right. Like a reference to the same energies.
Right.
but symbols of what was sacred to that particular region.
Right. Because you can only use what's in your environment. If you live in a desert, you can't use water to symbolize anything because you don't have any water. No one will understand what you're talking about. So you have to find some desert anomaly to symbolize something. So if you're in the rainforest, you're not going to use desert sand to symbolize something. You have to find something that explains an aspect of the rainforest ecology to symbolize what you're meaning to the people who live there. And that's the same around the world, because you'll find astrology even in America, in early America, and Mexico and Guatemala and South America, and they use some of the same symbols, and they use some different ones. They use what's in their environment that represents that body of energy that they're talking about.
Ashe.
But everybody's talking about the same body of energy.
Yes.
Though, let me just give one caveat.
Okay.
Different languages, some are better at replicating vibrations with the sounds to make words than others. Some is weaker. English would be probably the weakest of all the language systems.
Oh, yes,
And,
because it's the mixing pot of everyone else's language.
right, and replicating a vibration. But I would look at a language like the Metanetia of ancient Kemet, or even the language of Yoruba, the vibrations in those languages, or the language of the Zulus of South Africa, the vibrations in those languages is more in tune with the different universal element that it is trying to describe. So you not only hear the description, you feel the description. Whereas in English, you hear, but you don't really feel what you
Yes.
hear. You have to find a way to replicate the thing you should feel, because the language isn't strong enough to really give you the vibratory understanding of the body of energy. So when you go to Haiti, for instance, they speak a language which we call Creole, which is an amalgamation of some French, but ancient African language, and some Mesoamerican language. But even with that amalgamation and reducing of the French, they realized that the vibration isn't strong enough to fully describe what they're talking about. So they created another writing system called the Veves.
Oh, yes.
And what the Vede does is describe certain bodies of universal energy that has certain effects on the lives of human beings. But it all comes back to astrology.
It does.
Being able to explain the relationship between the human being and nature to everything else in cosmology.
Oh, yes. So, my next question is, because, when we met was when you came down in February of 2020 for a speaking engagement at the Shrine of the Black Madonna, Houston. And I was given the privilege of being the opening act, of performing a poem. And I remember in your lecture, you said the main God you seek is the one in your reflection.
The one in the mirror.
Oh, yes, the one in the mirror. How do you feel that a person knowing their astrology information can help them cultivate the God within? And the reason I'm asking this question is because I am an active astrologer. I do many astrology charts, and it's very fascinating because everybody has a different blueprint. But I just wanted your thoughts on how do you feel that someone knowing as much as they can about their inner universe, how would that help? Because a lot of people tend to ask me, why do I need to get an astrology reading? Because of where society is now. Of course, many people look at astrology as a bunch of fluff and stuff like that. But to you, how do you feel a person knowing their astrology information? How can that help them cultivate or seek the God they're looking for in themselves?
when I saw this little frail, or beautifully frail lady on the stage in Houston, I happened to be sitting behind her, and I could feel her anxiety, not fear, her anxiety.
Oh
But
boy.
yet, she went forth powerfully with her poetry. And so I knew that somebody is special in that body. They know something. They're not just um, moving as a mannequin that's performing or acting, but they were actually expressing.
Thank
So
you.
that's how we met.
Yes.
Um, and when we think of someone looking in the mirror and being able to see their own divinity, what astrology does is give you that body of knowledge to understand your divinity. You see? Because if your divinity is divorced from the rest of reality, then what you're thinking of as divinity isn't divine at all. And astrology shows you how you belong to everything else in nature and how you're affected by everything else in nature, cosmology, ecology, and how you affect it. So, if I woke up this morning, I'm feeling like really down, and nothing, physically has happened extraordinarily in your life, but you just feel like you can't get it together today. But something is happening in your life. You just don't have the body of knowledge to let you reflect or know where to look to see what is happening with the moon, what is happening with the sun, what is happening with the stars, what is happening with the constellations, what is the effect, what's going on in nature as a result of what's going on in what we call the heavens, and how is that affecting me? Is that determining my mood today? Should I be cautious about something today because I'm feeling anxiety? What is triggering that caution in me?
It's
And so if you really understood astrology, it would answer those questions for you.
Oh, yes. I'm really happy you made that point. Thank you so much for making that point. Because referring back to retrogrades, depending on which planet is retrograde, the zodiac signs that are under that planet are affected more than people who are not. For example, when Mercury goes into retrograde, Geminis and Virgos are the most affected by it because Geminis and Virgos are ruled by Mercury. You see what I'm saying? When Mars
Oh,
when Mars goes into retrograde, Scorpios and Aries are the most affected. Jupiter, Sagittarius. Well, I'm a Leo, so the sun doesn't retrograde, so us Leos don't have that problem. But you know what I mean.
yes, but though you are a Leo, you have aspects of some other
Oh,
of
yes.
the elements.
Oh, yes, because your
And,
sun sign is just
and,
the. Go ahead.
and their vibrations will either disturb or empower Leo in its position, depending on what's happening in the rest of the heavens.
Yes. And that's where your other signs come into play. Because one common misconception that I just demonstrated, actually, a common misconception of astrology is thinking that you can just go off of your sun sign alone, when your sun sign is just the cover of your cosmic book.
Right. It is the central part of your energy force, but it
Yes.
is affected by other elements of the energy.
Yes, and that's how we get into your moon sign, your rising, your descending, your vertex, your figure in African spirituality, and where all of the planets are placed in your inner universe. Because what I've learned from doing astrology readings is that every single human being is their own walking universe.
Absolutely. It's like we know in the world today that you can clone. They've cloned animals, and they've probably cloned human beings too, and they just haven't told us. But we know they've cloned sheep and they've cloned dogs and other things. And they can take one little cell from any part of your body and replicate the whole body. each of us is like a cell in the universe's body, but each of those cells is a replication of the universe in all of its possibilities. You see?
Yes.
And that's what, when one talks about spirituality, you are appealing to the individual's awareness that they are the universe. Unfortunately, we live in a world where we've been dumbed down to true knowledge and true understanding, so people don't see themselves as the universe. They don't see the organs in their bodies. Each organ in your body your liver is affected by a certain sign.
Yes.
Your stomach is affected by a certain sign. Your lung is affected by a certain sign. They're like the planetary bodies in a way. You know, your adrenal gland, your blood flow. When we look at the Milky Way and we see the Milky Way, these clusters and rivers of stars, yet each one of those stars have the powers of our sun. But when we see it as the universe, we see it as a river. Well, those rivers that contain those same bodies of energy flows throughout our body. We have multiple systems of circulation and of liquid that carries energy and information to other elements and other parts of the body. And it's just, but the West have reduced it to science and locked the body of knowledge away, so you can only get a little piece of it if you decide I'm going to be a doctor, a medical doctor. But he's not even going to let you get that big piece. You got to decide, I'm going to be an optometrist or a cardiologist or a pediatrician. So even then, he cuts it down even more on what you're able to truly learn. When in ancient times, we were taught through astrology the expanse of that body of knowledge, not the minimalization of the body of knowledge.
Ashe. Well, we're down to our last two questions. Question 1. Okay. This radio station that we're on is called 222.9, the Mothership, and chose this title through spiritual meditation and inspired by the psychedelic era of the 70s. Do you believe that perhaps the crack epidemic was induced in the 80s because in the 70s people were becoming too enlightened about things that we've been discussing for this past hour?
I don't like the term crack epidemic because then it makes the victim look like the problem.
Right. Okay.
We're going to call the chemical warfare.
Thank you for that correction.
Waged against the population in the form of what we call crack cocaine. Yes, I think it was absolutely a deliberate attack by the powers that be that control the economics and the political power in the societies we live in. The whole movement that they were calling the hippies, the whole movement of African consciousness, the whole movement of world revolution, the whole movement to try to change the means of production of the world and distribution of the wealth of the world that we saw exploding in the 60s.
Oh, it started in the 60s.
Yeah.
Okay.
We saw it giving birth to after the Second World War, really in 45. But you saw the explosion in the 60s of this consciousness, that this new consciousness. And so by the 70s, the attack came. And by the 80s, the attack, not only with the chemical warfare, but the drugs, out of which crack became the most effective one. But out of what we saw happening into the music we were listening to from, oh God, you name it.
Tom Brown.
To Etta James, to what's our brother that played the guitar so beautifully?
B.B. King?
No, not B.B., the younger brother who died young.
Jimi Hendrix.
Jimi Hendrix, Nina Simone. That body of information, even a Joan Baez, that body of spiritual energy that was stimulating the mind of the youth to reject the tyranny that was running the world, came under full attack. First they hit with the psychedelic drugs, and then they came with the crack cocaine, and they declared war on the consciousness. But then they realized we have to destroy what is informing that consciousness. And what you saw, music getting taken out of all of the schools across the country, nobody asked why. I was one of the few people who said, wait, what's happening here? How come you're closing all the music programs in the schools of the masses of the people? Right? And all of a sudden, Sam Cooke gets murdered, and Otis Redding gets murdered, and a few other people have traumas. And then you realize that they said, now we're talking about crossover music now. We don't want music coming from your soul, from your heart. And of course, the spirit fought back, and it fought back with what we got to know as rap and hip hop. But that was the spirit fighting back. Then they came after that and profaned that, because there's a spiritual war going on. Absolutely. And that spiritual war is to destroy us having access to the body of knowledge that we get in such a profound way through astrology,
And this is one of the main reasons why I created this radio station, to preserve the genius of our music.
Mm-hmm. Because music, the other thing they did with our music in the late 70s, they took out certain octaves. When you're listening to music, you're hearing music, but you're also feeling music. So what these demon consciousness did was use the new technology dealing with vibration and sound wave to remove those vibration aspect of music that allows you to feel the music. So you're still hearing the music, and you don't realize someone has taken out that aspect of it.
Oh, yes.
That allows you to feel the music in terms of records and CDs and what you hear with the radio. You're hearing the music and you're dancing, but you're not feeling the music. You see?
Exactly.
Because when you feel the vibration, we know that certain music can heal. We know that certain rhythm and certain vibrations, certain beats can heal certain organs and certain other illnesses in different parts of the body.
Yes.
And so they said, we got to move on this. Most people don't even know they've done such a thing, like taking out certain octaves, I think is the proper pronunciation. Yes. That's certain vibrations that a person make when they speak or when they sing, yes, or when they play an instrument. Because when you're playing an instrument, yes, that wood and that string is making the sound, but the vibration it makes has come from your brain, through your body, through your finger, into it to make the sound that you're giving to somebody else. So you're actually sending a vibration out of yourself that you receive from the universe out to myself. And so they cut off that communication.
Yes. See, I didn't know things to that detail. But I did feel something seriously missing from music. I can't listen to music I can't feel.
Right. There's a song going around the world right now. It's called Jerusalem, by a South African disc jockey, DJ KG, and a sister, Namsibo. It's lit up the world in the last 12 months. Most of us haven't heard it.
Okay.
The ancient word is that Jerusalem is my home. Jerusalem saved me. Jerusalem is my love. Jerusalem is my life. But she's singing it in Zulu.
I have to get that in rotation.
Yeah, go to the YouTube and just look up Jerusalem or DJ KC or Nasibo. Girl, it will blow your mind. And it has affected the whole world because they didn't catch it. Because it wasn't... See, they were busy blocking... And this is another piece we got to look at. They were busy blocking the African-American energy. And I'm not putting anybody down. I want people to understand this. The African-American... People say, well, I know African-American. Now, listen. America is your geopolitical place and Africa is your race. And in that concept of race is your spiritual energy, your central energy, your God energy. And we live in this space. But what makes us significant that people don't want to deal with is that we are the largest amalgamation of African genes in any population in the world. And I challenge anybody to challenge that. There's a reason the world fears us. We are the amalgamation of the Igbo, of the Zulu, of the Shona, of the Ndebele, of the Congo, of the Angola. We got them all. The Maputo, the Kenyans, this population in North America has the greatest amalgamation of African genes of any other African population on or off the continent. That makes us, in many ways, the primordial mother, or what you are calling the mothership.
Ashe.
I hope that makes sense. I try to keep things simple when I'm having a discussion or talk. So I hope that makes sense to you.
It does, but this interview will actually, after it airs live on the station, I will have it available where people can keep referring back to it.
Because what you will see, this is about vibration. Life is a vibration. And when someone learns to interfere in your vibration, they can cause you injury, and that's what crack did. You know, it interfered with the vibration. That's what taking the octaves out of the music was. It interfered with what fed you vibration. And, you know, that's what happened. People living in all these houses and covered up in all this clothes and cutting off the energy from the sun does. It interferes with the healthiness of your vibration. You know? Having people in a religious construct where they don't see themselves as a part of God, let alone as God, it interferes with your vibration. And so once they weaken your vibration, you're able to be dominant by them who have more access to your body of knowledge or the universal body of knowledge. And so they can control you through emotions and psycho-spiritual manipulation, through sounds and literature and visuals and other things. You know, imagine in Africa and most of Asia, where women walk around with their beautiful, gorgeous, voluptuous mammary gland that's used to feed the new life and give it eternity. And it's normal. And in America, you go to jail if you don't cover it up. You see the violation?
Absolutely.
Your dress is too short. Your legs are showing. It's crazy because we don't see what they've done. They're saying that you, the mini universe, is profane. So you must distort yourself with cover-ups. We'll call it designer fabrics or whatever. But you must distort yourself. Yet, I, the ruling elite, desire to experience the you that I've made you hid from yourself in order to elevate myself. But to you, you must see it as profane and something to be kept hidden. And yet, we can go back in the most ancient of times. The most beautiful thing in the universe is the human body.
Yes.
And they build a whole society around calling it profane. Sex is referred to as dirty. The only way you can replicate the universe as a creation phenomena is to have sex with the opposite polars and replicate yourself, and thus replicate constantly the universe. And that's why we got to get deep into this thing. See and understand how it affects us on a daily level. how it affects us societally. And astrology will open your mind to a deeper understanding of the you that someone has imprisoned in their false dichotomic culture, which is about nothing except restraining and restricting.
Ashe. All right. Last question. How do you feel astrology correlates or connects to Orisha and Ifa?
I haven't given it a deep study, but in many ways they're the same thing, just interpreted by different cultures. I mean, what we call the Orishas are simply bodies of energy, forces of nature, in the same way we call the signs of the zodiac. Each of those symbols in the zodiac represent a body of energy, forces of nature, that it can be found within every human being in to one degree or another, and is affected and governed by all of the other elemental bodies in the universe. So me being a priest of Oya, people say, Oya is the wind. Yes, but she's more than that.
Oh,
And they
yes.
say, Oya is the guardian of the cemetery of the ancestors. But yes, she's more than that. And she has 9 roads, all right, which I'm not going to go into. But that means 9 aspects of its expression,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And you can find this same type of phenomena with each of the zodiac signs, you know. So it's a system of what we call the Yoruba. I don't like the word religion because the Yorubas never had a religion. The Yoruba had a culture of cosmology and ecology that is explained through Ifa, which is the body of laws of the universe as they understand it and the wisdom passed on by the ancestors, and Orisha, which is the forces of nature, the powers within nature, and the powers within each living being. And so it is the same body of knowledge, just explained in a different system. Same thing with ancient Kemet, same thing with the Dogon, and so forth and so on. Wherever you go in Africa, you can go to South Africa, uncle, and you will find that it's the same system, the same body of knowledge, because they're having the same conversation about what is the relationship between the cosmology, the ecology, and the living beings.
Ashe. Well, I would like to say thank you again for taking this space and time in your being and in your life path to speak with me and to share with the listeners your views on astrology. Do you have any other thoughts before we close out this interview?
Well, I'll speak for my mother, Oya. I'm the guardian to the gateway to the cemetery.
Ashe.
Remember, who's in the cemetery? Your ancestors. What's in the heads of your ancestors? The wisdom of the universe. So Oya is the guardian to the great library of the universe itself. Okay? We guard the sacred wisdom of the ancestors.
I love it.
The gateway of the cemetery is simply a symbolic way of expressing that. But what we are guarding is the great body of wisdom that is represented in the experience of our ancestors, which is passed down to us in the Yoruba tradition as Ifa, you know. But that's the same body of wisdom that is passed down in Haiti called Voodoo, which is a word that simply means the essence of the divine in things. And so, and for our Orisha, you know, they have their Loa, which is embedded with their, and explaining itself with a, what do you call it, the bebe. And so each of the symbols we use, we're trying to explain the same universe. There's only one universe. We only have one sun heating, governing this planet. And no matter what culture you find yourself in, that's what you're trying to explain to yourself. How do I understand what my relationship should be? And that's why the ancestors invented what we call astrology. It is a way to understand your relationship to the rest of cosmology and ecology. So never forget that.
Ashe. Well, I thank you again so much for joining me. Everyone, be sure to like. Go ahead.
No, I always enjoy being in your presence. Even though I haven't seen you in years, when you talk a bit, I'm in your presence. You know, we talk a lot. I enjoy your wisdom. I enjoy your dedication with this radio station. I enjoy your dedication to the music, to try to bring those vibrations to people so they can feel again. And so anytime I can do any work with you, I'll be more than happy. Or just sit down and have a dialogue like we're having today, I'm more than happy.
I'm truly honored. I'm truly honored. Thank you so very much.
You're welcome, my dear.
Well, this is Iansa JT Muse signing off on 222.9, the Mothership, your mystic haven on the airwaves. Make sure you stay tuned to get more of that music mojo.
Lafayette all. This is Professor James Small, and you're listening to 222.9, the Mothership, your mystic haven on the airways. Beam up to www.poeticallymuse.org/mothership. Odabo.
So we go to the ship, right?
Yeah, we could.
Man, we going to the ship. We going to the ship, huh? 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 We going to the ship.
Ancestor veneration, poetry, literature, tribal sounds, sleep meditation, mystic wisdom, all in an elixir of tunes to feed your soul. You are listening to 222.9, the Mothership. Beam up.